It's the early morning of June 6, 1942, and the heavy cruiser Mikuma limps westward across the Pacific. Captain Shakao Sakiyama watches the sluggish trail of oil bleeding from his ship into the sea. The previous night's collision with Mogami had left Mikuma wounded, her hull battered, her speed compromised. Though she still sailed under her own power, Sakiyama knew that in these waters, survival required more than just movement. It demanded invisibility. And with the American fleet somewhere out there closing in, invisibility was no longer an option. The first attack had come with the morning sun, a reckless low-altitude charge by Marine Corps Vindicators. One had plowed straight into Mikuma's rear turret, igniting a fire that now raged below deck. His men fought the fire desperately, but the smoke rising into the sky was an unmissable beacon. A second strike was inevitable. Then a lookout's cry pierced the thick air. Aircraft. Many! Sakiyama turned his gaze upward. Against the glaring sunlight, dark specks emerged. American dive bombers, dozens of them, their wings angled downward, their bombs ready to drop. The battle wasn't just continuing, it was about to reach its final, crushing climax. As dawn broke on June 5th, the shattered remnants of the Kido Butai were slipping further westward, retreating into the vast Pacific. Though Midway's defenders and the US Navy had secured a decisive victory, Spruance knew the battle was not yet over. 4 enemy carriers, the Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, had been neutralized. But Japanese surface forces, battleships, cruisers, and destroyers were still unaccounted for. Intelligence reports hinted at the possibility of another carrier lurking beyond the horizon. As the fires from the 4 destroyed Japanese carriers continued to rage, Yamamoto was not ready to concede defeat. In an effort to salvage a victory from the wreckage of his fleet, he contemplated a night surface engagement, hoping to surprise the American task forces. The chaotic situation, however, made such a move impractical. Spruance refused to take the bait, keeping his distance and preserving his advantage. The Americans could not afford to let their guard down. As Spruance's Task Force 16 was still navigating through bad weather, they turned northwest to continue the search for a potential 5th Japanese carrier. At dawn on June 6th, he launched 18 scout bombers from Enterprise to search westward. The search planes swept across the ocean, probing the ocean for any sign of retreating enemy vessels. Then at dusk, a Catalina crew reported a ghostly glow on the horizon, the lingering flames of a burning warship. At 6:45, rather than a carrier, Ensign William D. Carter spotted the heavy cruisers Mogami and Mikuma with 2 destroyers. He did not realize this, and mistakenly reported them as a battlecruiser and cruiser. A miscommunication transmitted carrier instead, causing more confusion. Spruance, cautious after a fruitless search the previous day, dispatched cruiser float planes to verify the sighting. These confirmed the sighting at 7:30. Spruance ordered Hornet to launch its air group while holding Enterprise's planes in reserve. By 8 o'clock, Hornet launched 11 scout bombers, 14 dive bombers, and 8 Wildcats. The sighting had been correct, although the Americans were confused by certain reports about the ships being damaged. Most of all, they all knew they had not engaged this squadron before, so they were unsure if and why these ships appeared to be damaged. During that night of June 5th, after the devastating carrier battles and subsequent fruitless searches on both sides, the heavy cruisers Mogami and Mikuma initially continued their mission. Mogami had recently been placed under command of Rear Admiral Takeo Kurita as part of Cruiser Division 7. The division's orders were clear: to conduct a nighttime bombardment of Midway prior to a planned amphibious invasion. However, as the Japanese carrier force suffered catastrophic losses, the order was issued to recall the ships, just 90 miles from Midway. As the cruisers turned back towards home, they steamed forward at a steady 28 knots, flanked by the destroyers Asashio, Arashio, and the cruiser Suzuya. During the night of June 5th, at 2:15 as they navigated back, a lookout on the cruiser Kumano spotted the silhouette of the American submarine USS Tambo to starboard. Kurita swiftly ordered a turn to port. Mogami, at the rear, followed this maneuver. Mogami's captain scanned the distance ahead. He spotted what he thought was Mikuma, but something seemed wrong. The ship was farther than expected. To his growing dismay, he quickly realized that the vessel ahead was not Mikuma, but Suzuya, the cruiser on Mikuma's port side. Mikuma was hidden between the two. Panic ensued. There was no time to avoid the collision. With a desperate shout, the captain ordered, "Port the helm! Hard a port! Full astern!" But it was too late. Mogami collided with Mikuma. The force of the crash twisted Mogami's bow inward, crumpling the steel and leaving 40 feet of the forward section in ruins. Mikuma, severely damaged, began leaking oil into the sea, the slick marking the path of the damaged vessels. In the chaos that followed, Mogami's damage control officer sprang into action. The crew, trained for combat but not for such a devastating accident, worked quickly under the damage control officer's orders. He commanded the immediate disposal of all explosive and flammable materials, including depth charges and torpedoes, an order that was unpopular with Mogami's captain. After the damage control team stabilized the situation, Kurita surveyed the extent of the damage. Mogami could now only manage a meager 12 knots, and Mikuma trailed behind, leaving an oily wake. With the main fleet still awaiting rendezvous, Kurita made the decision to detach Mikuma and the destroyers to escort the crippled Mogami back, while he continued with Kumano and Suzuya to rejoin the fleet. While all this had been ongoing, the USS Tambor continued shadowing the Japanese fleet. Lieutenant Commander John W. Murphy, recognizing the opportunity, quickly relayed the critical information about the damaged cruisers to his chain of command. His report, detailing the collision and the status of the heavy cruisers, was swiftly transmitted through the ranks, eventually reaching Spruance. Concurrently, a scout plane from Midway spotted the leaking Mikuma at 6:30. With the enemy now located, Colonel Ira Kimes, commanding the Midway Air Group garrison, launched multiple planes. The first wave of aircraft was commanded by Captain Marshall Tyler. He led a squadron of 12 Vought Vindicator dive bombers to attack the damaged cruisers. The bombers made their run. As they descended, the Japanese flak was relentless. Captain Robert Fleming's Vindicator took a direct hit, setting it ablaze. Still, he dropped his bomb, and with his plane engulfed in flames, he drove it into Mikuma's rear turret, where the explosion caused severe damage. Another bomb dropped close to Mogami, causing splinter damage on board. Even Mogami's captain later referred to Fleming's action as very brave. The fiery crash dive had ignited a fire on Mikuma that spread rapidly into the intake of the starboard engine room. The fire ignited gas fumes, killing many of the crew and further crippling the cruiser's speed. Ensign Don Adams successfully hit the destroyer Asashio, while Wildcats strafed all 4 ships. As the pilot's reports filtered back to the flag bridge of the Enterprise, Admiral Spruance carefully assessed the situation. One of the reports indicated that the 2 damaged vessels were battleships, possibly even a carrier, high-value targets. However, Spruance could not get into position to launch an attack until later that morning. Finally, after rushing into position, the Enterprise and Hornet launched 57 dive bombers, escorted by 20 fighters. As Midway's aircraft garrison pressed their attack and Spruance's first wave was still on its way, at around noon, Enterprise launched a second wave of 46 aircraft, including 31 bombers and 3 torpedo planes, under strict orders to avoid unnecessary risks. These were the Pacific Fleet's last operational torpedo bombers. The attack on the Japanese force continued. 8 B-17s, now under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Brooke Allen, targeted the 2 cruisers. One near miss killed 2 men aboard Mogami. The Japanese ships were sitting ducks, their cruisers dwindling in speed, and the Americans receiving constant reports about what was ongoing. After the B-17 run was over, the SBD bombers from Hornet and Enterprise arrived. In the excitement of the attack, these pilots too mistakenly identified the cruisers as battleships. The dive bombers, swooping down from the sky, found the Japanese ships in a vulnerable state. With little resistance from the stricken cruisers, they dropped their bombs on Mikuma and Mogami. By now, Enterprise's planes arrived as well. The bombers focused heavily on Mikuma. They dived steeply at nearly 90 degrees, bypassing the heavy anti-aircraft fire. The damage was catastrophic. Its captain was killed as Mikuma suffered multiple hits. She slowed to a stop as thick smoke and steam rose from the wreck. Mogami was not spared either, with bombs punching through her hull, knocking out a turret, damaging torpedo tubes and igniting fires below decks. Mogami's damage control officer watched in horror as a bomb fell through the seaplane deck, starting a raging fire that engulfed the ship's sickbay. The sickbay, filled with wounded men, doctors, medics, and patients, was consumed by flames. Sarawatari, unable to control the inferno, ordered the compartment sealed off, trapping many inside. The destruction was immense. On Mikuma, the executive officer, Commander Hideo Takashima, gave the order to abandon ship. Despite Mogami's efforts to assist in rescuing the crew, the American attacks meant that over 100 men remained trapped in the water, unable to be pulled to safety. The aftermath of the American attack was a scene of devastation. The Japanese cruisers were shrouded in wreckage and smoke, their hulls riddled with damage. Sailors, desperately trying to stay afloat amid the pools of oil, were left helpless in the water. A diary of a pilot, Lieutenant Cleo Dobson, later recounted how when he reached the battle site, the sight of hundreds of sailors in the water struggling to survive overwhelmed him with a sense of empathy. As he flew over the scene, he found himself unable to carry out the strike. His mind, once focused on vengeance, was now clouded with compassion for the men fighting for their lives. Photos were taken from aboard the aircraft, showing the final moments of the Mikuma. As the day faded into night, Mikuma succumbed to the damage and sank shortly after sunset. Mogami, though severely crippled, managed to stagger away from the carnage. She had taken hundreds of hits, from strafing to bombs, and the toll on her crew was devastating. 90 men were killed, and 101 others were wounded. The survival of Mogami was due largely to the jettisoning of torpedoes and sealing off key compartments. Her journey took her to Truk in the Caroline Islands, where she underwent 5 weeks of repairs, enough to make her seaworthy again. As night fell, Spruance evaluated the situation. With the Japanese ships nearing Wake Island's air cover and his forces stretched thin, he opted to withdraw. By June 7th, Task Force 16 turned eastward, ending the pursuit. They secured a decisive victory at Midway. Yamamoto, defeated and humiliated, turned his fleet back toward Japan. As he steamed home, he prepared to offer his apology to Emperor Hirohito and shoulder full responsibility for the disastrous defeat that had irrevocably altered the course of the war in the Pacific. In total, Japan suffered a total of 3,057 fatalities. The 4 sunken Japanese carriers at Midway bore heavy human losses. Akagi accounted for 267 dead, while Kaga suffered 811 fatalities. Hiryu lost 392, including Vice Admiral Yamaguchi, who chose to go down with his ship, and Soryu counted 711 dead. Among them Captain Yanagimoto, who also stayed aboard to the end. Beyond the carriers, the heavy cruiser Mikuma sank with 700 crew members lost, and Mogami, though not sunk, endured 92 casualties. The destroyers Arashio and Asashio added to the toll, losing 35 and 21 men respectively, while scattered fatalities across other ships contributed an additional 23 losses. While losing all these ships was a decisive blow against Japan and its fleet, the fact they also lost 248 aircraft cannot be underestimated. Already at the Target Coral Sea a month earlier, Japan lost enough aircraft for the Zuikaku not to take part in the Battle of Midway, purely due to the lack of trained aircrew. Now, with 248 losses, they lost more than 3 times as many aircraft and pilots. These losses of aircraft mechanics, technicians, and trained aircrews were particularly damaging to Japan's naval aviation capabilities. The US lost the carrier Yorktown and the destroyer Hamon. In total, 307 men were killed. The fleet lost around 150 aircraft and their pilots. Among the dead were 3 US aviators, captured by the Japanese and executed. Regarding the initial carrier strikes, the disjointed departure of US aircraft from the carriers resulted in heavy American losses. particularly among torpedo bombers like the Devastators, whose outdated design and faulty torpedoes failed to inflict damage. The US strategically withdrew to avoid a risky night confrontation with the Japanese fleet, as Admiral Spruance prioritized the safety of Midway and his carriers. While Japanese morale temporarily improved due to exaggerated reports of having sunk 2 carriers, they unknowingly overestimated their success. The Battle of Midway was a decisive victory for the United States, despite its losses. Japan's inability to conceal the extent of their defeat forced changes in their naval tactics and training. However, the loss of experienced personnel marked the beginning of the decline in their naval air power, a blow from which they would never fully recover. This victory also showed the role of US intelligence efforts in intercepting and countering Japanese plans. Widely regarded as the turning point in the Pacific War, Midway marked the Allies' first major naval triumph over Japan, shifting the strategic initiative firmly to the United States. Had Japan succeeded, they might have captured Midway Island, revived plans to invade Fiji and Samoa, or even launched an attack against Hawaii. Instead, the outcome allowed the Allies to transition to offensive operations, beginning with the Guadalcanal campaign. Thank you for watching this video. Please leave a like. It really helps out the channel. If there is a topic, battle, or person you would like to know more about, let me know your thoughts in a comment. I would also like to thank all my patrons and channel members for their generous support. If you enjoy House of History and you want to support my work, consider joining me on Patreon. For just $1 per month, you will gain early access to all my videos without any in-video advertisements. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.